Harvey Glatman parked his old Dodge along Pico Boulevard and walked toward one of the houses. He stuck to his usual method and planned to proceed with the story he concocted every time. He would tell them he was a professional photographer and that he paid models for photo shoots. He repeated his story to himself under his breath and then rang the doorbell of Angela Rojas's house. Angela opened the door and let Harvey into her home. Of course, not everything was that simple. Harvey Glatman knew exactly what to do and had arranged this meeting in advance. Harvey worked with a modeling agency and had asked them to find him a model. His conditions were that the model had to be comfortable with nude photography and that all the photos would be taken inside the model's own home. Harvey didn't need to state all of this because as soon as he mentioned the condition of shooting inside the home, the agency understood the photos were going to be nudes. Many women were willing to be models for these photos and were in contact with modeling agencies. Angela Rojas was one of those models. An important point to know about this profession in the 1,950 seconds is that no specific contracts were signed for nude photography, and no documents were collected from the photographer or the models. The model's fee was paid, the agency took a percentage, and the photographer took the photos. Everyone was satisfied and there were no problems, but this time was different. Harvey Glatman used the fictitious name Frank Wilson to coordinate the job with the agency. He had to use a fake name because all the models this man worked with were never seen alive again after the photo shoot and were murdered. Inside the apartment, the two 4-year-old Rosa McAdoo, who used the alias Angela Rojas for her modeling work, let Frank Wilson into her home. Angela had come to Los Angeles from New York months ago with dreams of becoming famous in the Hollywood industry. Achieving fame wasn't that easy, and Angela soon realized after moving to Los Angeles that the dream of becoming a Hollywood star might be far out of reach. She had no particular skills, no higher education, and in 1957 Los Angeles, there were not many good job opportunities for someone in Angela's situation. She could have been a cashier, a store clerk, or a waitress, but she wouldn't have earned enough money to afford the comfortable life she wanted. Finally, she decided to become a nude model because she could earn good money and not have to worry about paying rent and buying necessities. Angela wasn't happy with what she was doing because many people considered it prostitution, but she believed that modeling for nude photography was not prostitution because no one touched her. According to the modeling agency's rules, the only thing the model had to do was pose, and the photographer or any other person had no right to touch the model. In short, Angela Rojas opened the door and let Frank Wilson, or Harvey, inside. Immediately after entering, she noticed he wasn't holding a camera and asked, "Where is the camera?" Frank replied, "It's in the car." To continue the conversation, Angela said she would go put on something more comfortable, and in the meantime, Frank could go get his camera from the car. In response, Frank immediately pulled a small gun out of his coat pocket and placed it under Angela's chin. He demanded they go to Angela's bedroom and paid no attention to the woman's pleas and fear. He forced her to take off her clothes, then pulled a rope from his pocket and tied Angela's hands and feet. He raped her for an hour. He did not use physical violence, and it was very strange that he tried to treat the victim calmly and with some mercy. He told her he wanted to make love to her and wouldn't harm her. After an hour, Frank lay down on the bed next to Angela and said, "Let's go on a picnic." Angela was confused and didn't understand what the man meant. Frank continued, "Tonight we can go on a romantic picnic. If you don't cry and don't try to run away, I'll untie the rope." Frank untied the victim's hands and feet, then told her to get dressed while he watched her, sitting on a chair with the gun in his hand. When the woman was ready, Frank tied her hands behind her back, threw a coat over her shoulders to hide the rope, then the two of them left the house and got into the car. Frank, or Harvey, drove east and reached a desert area. It was around morning and the sky was slowly brightening when the man stopped the car somewhere in the middle of the desert. The two of them got out, watched the sunrise, and Harvey raped Angela one more time. They spent the entire day outside in the middle of the desert. Harvey took a lot of nude photos of Angela and spent time with her. However, He knew well that with every passing second, the time for murder was approaching, and he couldn't keep Angela alive with him forever. Harvey later told the police that he didn't want to kill Angela, that he loved this woman more than all the other victims, and letting go of her was very hard for him. Angela, however, was hopeful all day that she would survive, thinking Frank Wilson was going to let her go. But this hope faded when, at the end of the day, Frank asked her to play the role of a dead woman in front of the camera for a photo. He took a few photos of her in that pose, then tied her hands and feet again, and before Angela could say anything, he threw her onto her stomach and wrapped the rope around her neck. Rosa Maicadu, known by the alias Angela Rojas, lost her life. For a moment, Harvey Glatman was sorry. He looked at Angela's body and couldn't believe he had killed this woman. He took a few more photos of her and then returned home without giving the situation any importance. He was happy because he was excited to develop the new photos he had taken. Angela was no longer alive, but those photos were immortal. Arvin Murray Glatman was born on the 10th of December 1927 in New York. He was an only child, and his parents were of Russo-Polish descent. Harvey was never a social child and had no friends. He didn't talk to anyone at school, didn't like spending time with other children, and in the truest sense of the word, was not friends with anyone. At the age of 12, his parents noticed that the child was exhibiting sadomasochistic behaviors and became very worried. Harvey would take a strong string, tie one end to a closet and the other end to his own genitals, then move the closet door quickly. His mother took the child to a doctor, and the doctor told them not to worry too much, that Harvey would grow up and not repeat these things. In his teens, Harvey Glatman would sneak into the apartments of women who lived alone, steal items like clothing or, in one case, a gun, and search their homes. Over time, this theft turned into stalking women and a desire for sexual assault. In August 1945, Harvey was arrested for kidnapping and sexual assault of a woman and was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. He was in prison for only 3 years and was released in 1948. During his time in prison, several psychiatrists spoke with him and diagnosed him as having a psychopathic personality, suffering from a type of schizophrenia with sexual deviant motives, and that he could be dangerous to society. There are reports from his time in prison that show Harvey was a model prisoner, had a high IQ, and knew exactly how to behave to be accepted by the prison guards. After a few years of living with his parents, Harvey left his family home in January 1957 and came to Los Angeles. This time there was no one watching over him, and he could do whatever he wanted. The first thing he did after arriving in Los Angeles was to buy a camera. He had loved photography since he was a teenager and had read a lot about it in high school. Harvey was literally fascinated by photography and could never explain the reason for his interest in this art. He was fascinated by photography because he could capture unrepeatable moments, like murder. Anyway, he was not a professional photographer, and in the beginning, photography was more of a hobby for him than a job. He worked in a television repair shop, and with the money he earned, he bought a small apartment and a second-hand car. Then he worked more and was able to buy a cool camera along with photography equipment. With good equipment and a little experience in photography, he now only needed a pseudonym to operate. He took the name Johnny Glynn because he liked the sound of it. Then he went to different studios, met models, and took pictures of them for a fee of $20. From the very beginning, he worked in the field of nude photography, and his only use for the photos was for sexual pleasure, meaning he did not sell the photos, send them to magazines for printing, or give them to the models themselves. Harvey Glatman photographed many models, but gradually this work became repetitive for him. Seeing the photos was no longer enough. He had to touch them. He had to control them. Harvey's first victim was a 9-year-old girl named Judith Dull. She had married at a young age and had a small child, but unfortunately, her marriage did not go well, and she divorced her husband. The custody of the child went to court, and her ex-husband was harassing her a lot. The 9-year-old Judith was willing to do anything to earn money for a lawyer and win in court, so she went to a modeling agency to become a model. Harvey chose Judith from the list of models that the agency provided him, and contacted her. On the 1st of August 1957, Harvey told Judith that he was doing a photo shoot for a famous true crime magazine and was looking for a model. The theme of the photo was the reconstruction of crime scenes. He also emphasized that this was a great opportunity and could be a good position for Judith's success. At first, Harvey went to Judith's house, but after a few minutes, he told her that the light here was not good, and if it was possible, they should go to Harvey's studio. The studio was actually his apartment, and Judith agreed. Inside the apartment, Harvey explained that the theme of the photos was related to kidnapping and captivity, and that he had to tie Judith's hands and feet with a rope. The victim also agreed, and Harvey tied her hands and feet. When Judith could no longer move, Harvey pulled a gun out of his pocket and put it under Judith's chin. He forced this woman to pose naked with threats, photographed her, and then sexually assaulted the victim. After each assault, he would force Judith to sit next to him, watch a comedy show on TV together, and spend time. Then he would assault her again. He repeated this several times, and in between, he would tell Judith that she could go home afterward. At 10:30 p.m., Harvey told the victim that he would free her, but they had to go to a place outside the city so that Judith could find her own way back. In short, the two of them got into the car. Inside the car, Harvey drove with one hand and held a gun pointed at Judith with the other. They went towards the desert and finally reached the place Harvey wanted. This man pulled Judith out of the car and acted as if he wanted to untie the knot of the rope, but very suddenly he pulled the rope around Judith's neck and strangled the victim. Judith Dull, 19 years old, was Harvey's first murder victim. The killer moved the body like a statue, opened her arms and legs, took a few photos of her, and then returned home. 7 months after Judith's murder, Harvey met a new victim. Shirley Ann Bridgeford, 24, had recently divorced her husband and had 2 young sons. Shirley joined the Lonely Hearts Club in the hope of finding a suitable man for her life. This club was for single people, and they would meet each other there to see if they were suitable for a relationship. Shirley was not a perfectionist and was not looking for a prince. She just wanted someone to be by her side in life and love her. In general, she was not a picky person. Through the Lonely Hearts Club, she met a man named George Williams, and the two went on their first date on the 7th of March 1958. Shirley did not like George. His appearance was not to her liking, and she was not very into him, but she had no problem going on a date with him. She thought their relationship was not going to be serious, and spending a few hours together was not so bad. George Williams was actually Harvey Glatman. Shirley did not know, but we know that this man's intention was not to date Shirley, but he had the motive to kill. Harvey spent some time with Shirley and then took this woman to the desert with a gun threat, raped her, and repeated everything he had done to Judith with Shirley. In the dark of night, he took nude photos of Shirley Ann Bridgeford, and after strangling her, he also photographed her corpse. 4 months later, Harvey Glatman took the life of Angela Rojas. We talked about Angela at the beginning of the case and saw how with Angela's murder, this man became a serial killer. Harvey dumped Angela's body near Shirley's remains. At the same time, the families and friends of these 3 victims asked the police every day and every night what had happened to their girls. The police said about Judith that women always run away. They run away from their boyfriends, from their husbands, and even from their families. Judith certainly ran away too. When Shirley and Angela were added to the list of victims, it was no longer easy to stick the runaway label on their cases because, first of all, Judith and Angela had similar similarities, and this showed a pattern. And second, Shirley was an example of a good girl from society's point of view. Good girls don't run away, do they? The gun and rope were symbols of sexual power for Harvey, and so far he had been able to control women with them. He also thought he could continue his work for a long time, but he was seriously mistaken. In the summer of 1958, Harvey came across a new studio called Diane's. This modeling agency was classier than the previous ones. Their models were more expensive, and it was located in a better place. The owner of this studio was a woman named Diane, who also did modeling work herself. After a few months of waiting, Harvey went to this studio with the name Frank Johnson and said he wanted to rent a model for a photo shoot. He requested Diane herself for his photos, but Diane didn't like Harvey's appearance. In her opinion, Harvey's hair was dirty and messy, and he also smelled. She pretended to be very busy and couldn't accept, but suggested another model. That other model was named Lorraine Vigil, and she immediately agreed to be Harvey's photo model. Before the photo shoot time came, Diane called Lorraine and said, "Be careful of this moron client, he's not professional and looks scary. You know what I mean, right?" Lorraine promised to be careful about everything and thanked Diane. At 8 p.m., Harvey came to pick up Lorraine, and the two of them headed towards the studio. No words were spoken on the way, but when Harvey drove the car towards the highway, Lorraine said the studio was not this way. Harvey replied, "I didn't tell you. I gave my turn to another client. We are going to my own personal studio." Lorraine was a little scared, but on the other hand, she didn't want to ruin her professional image. This was the first project she had taken from Diane's studio, and it was very important how it went. She started arguing with Harvey and asked him questions about where they were going, why they had left the city, and asked so many questions that Harvey got angry. He cursed at her, drove very dangerously for a few minutes, and then pulled over. He held Lorraine's hands to tie them, but this woman, unlike the previous 3 victims, fought with Harvey. She pulled herself with all her strength towards the car door to get out, and this matter was very strange for Harvey because until now none of the victims had tried to escape. Harvey pulled a gun on Lorraine, but Lorraine continued to fight. She reached for the gun and tried to push it aside, but Harvey accidentally fired. The bullet passed through Lorraine's skirt and went through the corner of her thigh. Harvey did not expect the shot, so the sound of the gun caused him to be distracted for a second. Lorraine also used this moment, pulled the gun from Harvey's hand, and jumped out of the car. She could feel Harvey's presence behind her. The killer had also come after the victim and was trying to pull her jacket. At this moment, Lorraine thought it was over, that she was about to be murdered and lose her life. But right at that moment, a police car stopped next to them. Lorraine Vigil threw the gun on the ground and then fell at the feet of the police forces, crying. Harvey Glatman whispered under his breath that he was not at fault and had not done anything, but the police were not buying these words. This police officer who arrested Glatman later said about him, "He had a crazy look." I will never forget the savagery that was in Harvey Glatman's eyes. After finding the camera and Lorraine's statements, Harvey was also charged with the murder of the 3 previous victims at the police station. At first, he said nothing and claimed innocence, but then under the pressure of interrogation and the police's repeated questions, he suddenly broke down. He fell next to the table and while sobbing, he shouted, okay, I killed them all, and you will only understand the details if you find the toolbox." The police asked more about this toolbox and finally realized that the toolbox was the box where Harvey kept the photos he had taken of the victims. Police forces were dispatched to Harvey's apartment to search. They found the box, and it was only then that they realized the depth of the tragedy. Harvey Glatman had taken pictures of all the stages of his crimes, from the time the victim was alive and breathing to when her lifeless body was lying on the ground. These photos and Harvey's own confessions were enough for a conviction, but the police were looking for the bodies, and the families also wanted the remains of their loved ones. The police forces went to the desert with Harvey at night, and this serial killer showed them the location of the bodies. Although it was night, Harvey Glatman knew the desert like the back of his hand and easily led the officers to the bodies. First, he showed them where he had raped and killed Shirley Bridgeford. Then he showed them Shirley's jacket and her bones. The remains of this woman were scattered to a considerable extent due to wind and wild animals, and parts of the bones were missing, but the remains that were found were enough to identify Shirley. Harvey also showed the police the remains of the other 2 victims, and then they returned to the sheriff's office. Over the course of 4 hours, he pointed out every single detail of his crime. The date, the victim's name, the alias he himself had used, the victim's information, the method of murder, the location of the murder, and all the details. He told the police everything completely accurately, and not even a hint of remorse or sadness was seen in his tone. His face and voice were completely monotonous, and he described the most horrible things he had done without any change in his tone or showing any emotion. Between all his statements, he repeated that he intended to die and definitely wanted the death penalty. When Harvey's case was printed in the newspapers with the headline, "The Lonely Hearts Killer," only one person felt sorry for this man, and that was his mother. At the age of 69, Harvey's mother traveled from New York to California to see her son. On November 12, she was allowed to see Harvey. We don't know what they talked about, but his mother came out of the prison cell very soon. When the press surrounded this woman and asked her questions one after another, she said, "Harvey is not a wicked man, he is sick." Journalists also used this sentence in every single one of their articles. This very "he is sick" caused Harvey's lawyer to make a statement in court and say that his client did not have sufficient mental health. Several psychiatrists examined the criminal, and finally, on December 12, they said that this individual shows no signs of psychosis, has the ability to distinguish right from wrong, and was well aware of the consequences of these actions when committing the crime. During the trial, they were able to convict Harvey of first-degree murder for killing the victims. This serial killer was supposed to receive either a life sentence or be executed, which the court judge announced at the end of the session. "I find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, and I determine the death penalty for him." The death penalty is an appropriate sentence for this particular case and must be issued. Mr. Glatman, may God have mercy on your soul. Harvey Glatman was prisoner number A5239 and was transferred to San Quentin Prison. His cell was separate from the other prisoners, and Harvey hated life inside prison. He had no rope, no camera, no photos, and no victims. He was imprisoned for about a year and then was executed on the morning of the 18th of September 1959. Harvey was taken to the green room of San Quentin Prison, which is a chamber for execution by gas, and was executed by inhaling cyanide. The execution began at 10 a.m. and lasted a total of 12 minutes. Only 12 minutes, much less than the deaths of Judith, Shirley, and Angela. In the green room, at 10:01 he was placed. At 10:02 Harvey sat on the chair and was secured, and then he inhaled the sodium cyanide gas. His pulse was 200 beats per minute, but at 10:05 it dropped to 60. At 10:06 he started gasping, and at 10:07 he drooled. His head fell on his shoulder, twitched again, another twitch, and finally at 10:12 his heart stopped. Harvey Glatman was executed at the age of 31, and although he demanded death, he was afraid of the gas chamber. In any case, poisoning with sodium cyanide seemed like a terrifying way to die. Many believe that perhaps Harvey had hoped to be hanged by a rope for execution, so that he could enjoy the moment of death.